All right. Take it away, Alex and Ellen.
Alrighty. Thank you all. It's nice to be here. As we were talking to Laura and planning this, we are like, oh, kind of what night do we want to do it? What time? What gets the most people? And Ellen and I both heard, oh, Friday nights, and we're kind of like, is there going to be anybody there? And turns out that there are people here. So if you are, I see a lot of folks are, maybe eating dinner, or doing things and multitasking. I'm not just as culpable of that, but if you do feel comfortable, feel free to leave your camera on. It's nice to see. I teach with people's with the screens visible, so I do like that and like the personal connection that we sometimes miss out on in a virtual environment like this. But again, feel free to do that in whatever way makes the most sense to you. And that'll be sort of how we go about things for the rest of the day, rest of the evening, that Ellen and I will be talking about the NeuroAffective relational model, which is a relatively new and integrative model for working with complex trauma. We are here because we love it and we believe in it and hope to grow the community around it. We don't get a commission or anything like that. So just here because we're really passionate about this and really looking forward to sharing it with you all and hearing thoughts and questions and your reactions and integrations about it also. And so with that, we come here not to say this is the absolute right way to do things. I think in our own ways, Ellen and I both are integrative in our approaches, that we draw on NARM in certain ways. And also there are a lot of great models out there, and certainly invite folks to consider what resonates for them and how it fits with all of these great techniques and models that you do already use, because that's ultimately what makes for a really rich and interesting conversation. So with that, we'll just do a brief introduction of ourselves. I am Alex White. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor based here in Salt Lake. I work many places at the University of Utah Counseling Center as a staff therapist there. I do some adjunct teaching at Westminster College in their counseling program, and also maintain a small private practice where I really specialize in working with folks from helping professions. So folks in the medical backgrounds, or the therapists and those kinds of things as well. I really love that kind of thing. And I came to NARM sort of, I guess, right at the start of the pandemic, wherein as I reflect, really had a lot of foundation laid for me from very early on. My first job out of college was at a therapeutic group home, and before I really had a framework or model for it, I learned how developmental and complex trauma played into the relationships and interactions that I was having with these kiddos, and pretty quickly learned if I was going to be effective that I was going to have to guide and try to understand not just how they were seeing the world, but how they were seeing me, and guide and shift the way that I show up in order to be a supportive and healing presence for them as best I could. And so these were sort of things that I learned in kind of a sink or swim setting, if you've ever worked in residential treatment before. Then made my way through grad school in different kinds of settings and all of that. And up until 2020, had sort of been floundering a little bit and trying out different techniques and approaches. And it was really at that point when some of these NARM trainings for the first time were offered online that I was able to get introduced to them here. Most of them had taken place in California or other sort of bigger cities, metropolitan areas. And I sort of fell in love. It's really revolutionized not only the work that I do clinically, but even my sort of relationship to myself personally, and have continued every year since in progressive trainings. I'm retaking the master's training this year because I don't want that work to be over. And I'm also moving into a role as a training assistant this year as well. So really psyched to be here. Ellen?
Thank you, Alex. And I would also like to thank all of you for joining us on a snowy Friday evening. At least you can be at home in your socks and maybe having something warm to eat with your family around you. My name is Ellen Byrne. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm actually a newcomer to Utah. I grew up in the Midwest, but spent quite a bit of time in California and then moved here, relocated in 2021. So I live in Heber City, and I'm preparing to reopen my practice in the Park City area this spring. I've actually been in private practice as a body worker since 1995, and most of that has focused on therapeutic body work and body-based trauma resolution. My first training was in somatic experiencing, which I was introduced to after working with people in comas and severe accidents. And I was really excited to see the impact of weaving that into my work. It made a huge difference. And it also supported me as a body worker to interact with people on a responsible level, talking to them about their experience and not necessarily having to split that off from their embodied experience on the table while they were talking to me. But as I began to take on more clients and actually do more consultations with therapists about my clients and to learn about what trauma was, I got really hungry to understand about developmental trauma. And that was also my experience in learning the SE model, because what I began to understand at that point was that I had plenty of developmental trauma and not so much shock trauma. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, these parts of the field weren't so clearly delineated. So I just continued my search and eventually was introduced to NARM by some great therapist friends and was just blown away. I just thought this is the most humane, sort of sophisticated, elegant, and yet simple model. It has many contradictions into it. It's simple and it's complex. So anyway, I like Alex have really fallen in love with NARM, but I'm not here to convert you. We're only here to offer you an overview and give you some familiarity with the model. So basically, I've completed the training through the master level, and I continue with the NARM training as a lead assistant at this point. I also will share with you that as a body worker, the deeper I got into NARM, the more I was confronted with some of the limitations of my scope of practice as a licensed body worker. And wanting to be responsible about that and wanting to understand more about psychotherapy, I actually earned a master's in counseling. And I did that during COVID. I will say to you, as one of my favorite professors said to me, anybody who has gone to school during COVID has a subspecialty in trauma. You have been introduced to it, whether you wanted to be or not. You have experienced it, and you have hopefully, found the path of your healing or started on that. So anyway, for tonight, I'd just like to encourage you to sit back. NARM is an embodied method, and we're going to have some experiential moments here, which you can participate in if you choose. If you don't, you can just sit back. And I'd also like to thank Laura and the Trauma Informed Care Network for making this possible tonight. So Alex and I will be speaking for about an hour and a quarter, someplace around that, and we'll be leaving time for your questions at the end.
Yeah. All right, so to get us started, as you said, NARM is an embodied model. And so, we seek to not just engage or invite engagement on a cognitive level, but also sort of the more vast and diverse realms of human experience. So that, the emotional, the physical, the the spiritual maybe. So invite folks, we'll be offering a few different experiential exercises that you can engage with to in whatever way you see fit with that. Obviously, there's no expectation to do anything. There's no right or wrong way. But just an opportunity to, to do a little bit of exploring of some of the concepts from more of an embodied place. So with that, the invitation is to reflect on an experience where you felt really connected, safe, seen, cared for, and nurtured. And with this, we invite you to consider what you notice in your physical experience, your emotions, your memories and thoughts, your impulses, your overall sense of yourself. So I'll give folks just, a minute to reflect on that, notice what they notice. And as we, sort of wrap up this particular piece, invite if folks did explore that activity and have any reactions or a word or two comes to mind that was reflective of their experience, we invite you to just put that in the chat box if there is anything that comes up. For me, I think about somebody shared, like my true self. I agree. For me, I think about a time working at a summer camp in college where I was among some of the most wonderful, loving, open, caring people who just saw me in a way that I don't know if I'd ever had before, and have this kind of ebullience and warmth that comes to me. Folks are sharing warm, relaxed, grateful, authentic sense of well-being and peace. Somebody shared, impulses didn't seem to come up. Maybe that's instructive in and of itself. Overall sense of self, felt comfortable, and judged myself less or not at all. This is a relational experience for me, for sure. Thank you all. Yeah, and I think that leads us really well into, the next couple of slides as we start to introduce sort of the framework of the underpinning of what plays into, complex and developmental trauma. So there's a couple of quotes that I'll share up next, probably some familiar names to many of you. And I'll just let folks read those without explanation and kind of get a sense of what you notice just as we start to move into the next phase of the conversation. Thank you all. And the next. So in NARM, we see that as sort of the eternal question. How do we reconnect? If trauma has served to disconnect us, how do we reconnect? And there's a couple of books that we rely on a lot, not only in the clinical work we do, but we'll refer to here. The first of which was published in 2011, so a little while ago now, and by Doctors Lawrence Heller and Aline Lapierre, with the original title of Connection, Our Deepest Longing and Greatest Fear. And this understanding is something that underpins sort of all the elements of the NARM framework. The publishers of the book decided that there weren't enough effective search terms in there, that it wasn't Googleable enough. So they provided an alternative, healing developmental trauma, which was actually probably more effective. They know what they're doing. And, because it really does speak to what we're working with and what we are addressing here. We operate under the understanding that human beings have both a need to connect, but also by virtue of the experiences we've had, and the developmental themes and frameworks that we've experienced, also have a fear of that connection. So instead, we notice that we see trauma not as something that happened to us in the traditional sense, not an event per se, but looking deeper to that to understand how we had to separate and disconnect from ourselves in order to adapt to what happened, how we had to shift or reframe, get away from our inner experience, whatever that entailed, to be able to survive whatever it was that was overwhelming to us. And at the time, that kind of thing makes sense. And also going forward in our lives, we ask ourselves, how can we reconnect? What do we need to do in order to be back in ourselves, in our body, have the sense of aliveness and connection that we're wanting? And that takes us to our more recent book, which was published just recently, July 2022. And everyone, admittedly, they're mostly NARM people, but everyone is thrilled that we have this as an option as well. And we really want to have a lot of deep gratitude for Dr. Heller and Brad Kammer, who were the co-authors of this one. This is the practical guide for healing developmental trauma. So after being translated in several different languages and distributed all over the world with the original book, there was a growing need and demand for more practical skills and knowledge around how to create this, how to implement this model. And
it's out for the right.
And fortunately, we were all really happy to have it, and so it's a great resource. Would definitely recommend it I recommended it to a client the other day because they were interested. So it's written really accessibly and effectively. So really, really grateful and excited to share some of what was discussed in that with you all today. So moving into what are we actually talking about here? The NeuroAffective relational model. It's a wordy title, but really does, as we break it down, encapsulate what we're talking about and how we understand not just the impacts of trauma, but the healing of them. And as we see it, it provides a comprehensive therapeutic model for working with the psychobiological patterns shaped by complex trauma, which we see as anything from attachment, relational, developmental, cultural, and intergenerational. So, it goes beyond even just the developmental, as I've been saying, and really covers all of these significant pieces. And I will define that term psychobiological, because as many of us know, right, the trauma does not just impact us on a cognitive or emotional level, but holistically. And so, the psychobiological accounts for not only our psychological, or not only our psychological, processes around it, but also the physical processes that are impacted as well. Now, many folks are probably familiar with the ACEs study, and this is the development of this, and kind of the more prominence that these ideas have gotten is ultimately how NARM and other models, the reason why NARM and other models have been gaining steam and importance, because more and more folks are recognizing that not just it goes beyond just the attachment or the caregiver relationship. Of course, those things are important, but also looks to the communities. I like this graphic because it talks about the tree as the household, right? So that's like the family unit, but then goes into the community experience. So all the soil that the tree grew from. Things like income inequality, food scarcity, poverty, and then even beyond that, the climate crisis that we are all subject to, a pandemic that every one of us has been impacted by, earthquakes, sea level rise, heat, these kinds of things are all impacting one another. And acknowledging the sort of layers of this kind of process is what's really, critical in understanding not just the impacts of adverse childhood experiences, but how to treat them. Like a parent in many situations could be doing the very best that they could. It may go way beyond the attachment situation itself, but if they are impacted by income inequality and systemic racism and a pandemic, it's going to be very hard to create an environment wherein a child can develop healthy attachment and sense of themselves. So, I think that what's exciting to me is the extent to which we're starting to understand the layers here, rather than focusing on the singular attachment unit. And with that, we introduce this idea as sort of an alternative to like attachment trauma or attachment disruption in the traditional literature. We introduce this idea of environmental failure. And how I explain this to clients, that it tends to really land in a very sort of simple way, is any way in which the environment was unable to meet your needs. The environment can be a family, it can be a school, it can be a neighborhood, it can be the United States, it can be Western culture. There are a lot of layers to this environmental failure. And so it is less about the needs being too much or the needs being inappropriate in a lot of ways that I think people tend to shame themselves around, like, oh, that needy, or, that kind of thing that we can tell ourselves, but rather that the environment, it isn't on us to manage our own needs as babies, as young children. It's on the environment to take care of us. We are innately reliant on that as human babies. So I like that wording and understanding of it, taking it out of the the individual context and really looking at the broader impacts here. There's a little graphic there that basically depicts a group of people together, and the caption is to help heal our trauma. So in the way that we are separated and have to disconnect in traumatic experiences, particularly in childhood, connection with one another is what we see as a healing factor. And yeah, I covered that. So, do you want to take this one, Ellen?
Yeah, so, as Alex was saying, since the original ACEs study was done, the recognition of the sources of ACEs has expanded from, the idea of family and the individual parental units to our entire environment. And I think this also reflects our growing political and cultural awareness that we try to bring into our therapeutic practice. So I can't see everybody's face, but I assume everybody here has been through school or is going through school. I don't know your age group, but it was amazing to me. I had known about ACEs, but it wasn't until I got to graduate school that I actually understood the origin of that study. And it goes back to the mid-90s when Kaiser, they do a lot of long-term studies and research because they have access to such a large population and medical records. They were doing a study on weight loss. And what they found out was past a certain point, there was this enormous fallout in the people participating in the study. And what they did unusually was they followed up with these people to find out what happened and what was getting in the way. This is such an interesting question. What was getting in the way for these people for doing something they wanted to do, they understood was the best choice for their health. They were getting support from their family and from Kaiser, the medical care. And yet something was getting in their way. And as they dug deeper, they found out that these people shared what we now understand as adverse childhood experiences. So there was a follow-up study that basically focused on this discovery that adverse childhood experiences, abuse, neglect, familial dysfunction, and all the failures of these other outer circles of support that we have in our life or connection that we have in our life, that adverse experiences, the absence or perhaps the intentional cruelty had significant long-term effects, not just on the child, but on adult health. And this showed up in social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, high-risk behavior, disease and disability, and even early death. So what we have here is a conceptual framework for beginning to understand the complexity of what really constitutes what we're calling complex PTSD, the roots that go deeply into our biology, the triggering of epigenetic factors, and also the transmission of intergenerational trauma. So NARM really embraces understanding this because as Alex was saying, we're looking at environmental failures from everything from the closest caregivers and attachment relationships all the way out. And this also allows our clients to come to us and understand their own relationship to their history rather than our interpreting it for them. And we also recognize that ACEs are significant in that they disturb our relationship with ourself, not just our outer appearance or behavior, but our actual relationship with our authentic self and our ability to make decisions that are motivated by authentic needs and desires. And in NARM, what we consider, so we cannot change this past, but we can become aware of the adaptations. So let's move on to Oprah here. So one thing about being specialized and trained in your field is that things become very self-evident to us. We have our own epiphanies in school or reading books or hearing lectures, maybe a presentation such as this. But what really happens in the general Gestalt or culture is that it takes decades for some of this clinical awareness to really move into the culture. And Oprah is a person who's been very honest about her own childhood trauma and abuse. And she's also been very open with her personal struggles around her weight. And if you go back to actually the story about the Kaiser study that sort of unearthed this whole concept of ACEs, you can begin to imagine why she said, ACEs are a game changer. Unless you fix the trauma where the wound started, you're working at the wrong thing. Think about how many motivational diets Oprah was probably given. She had the best of people willing to make meals for her, give her advice, whatever. But for her to be able to understand the context of her health, the difficulty of making healthy decisions for herself, and to not blame herself came through her understanding of ACEs. And in fact, she actually turned it around and said, let's educate the professionals, and said, let's educate your doctor.
Thanks. So recognizing that, ACEs are a factor, a significant factor in, many of our lives. For me, I sort of just operate under the assumption at this point that whether somebody is coming in with concerns around anxiety or depression or whatever it might be, that there's complex trauma on board. But up until recently, we haven't had any sort of formal diagnosis that would have articulated that. Folks who are familiar with the Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, he tells a little bit of the story and history, but that even PTSD, which is in some ways a more concrete diagnosis as far as the symptomatic presentation, wasn't recognized even until 1980, and really didn't show up in a lot of the literature until the mid-90s. And so this, people were still being traumatized. This was still going on. But up until relatively recently, we didn't have anything to call it, and still not until 2018 was there any sort of formal diagnosis that looked not just at PTSD itself, but at complex PTSD. Because we'll talk about in a second, as much as there's similar roots to these kinds of things, that there are some different dynamics and presentations. Like if you're somebody who has an entire childhood worth of adverse childhood experiences, it's hard to point to one singular one and say, oh, that's what gave me PTSD, right? It shifts not only our experience in kind of the somatic and physiological elements, but also our sense of ourself, our emotion regulation, all of these factors that we see that up to this point weren't encapsulated within a singular diagnosis. So 2018 was a big year in that the World Health Organization and the International Classification of Disease finally recognized a new diagnosis, CPTSD 6B41, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so, what's striking to me is that, a lot of us have been working with these kind of things for a while, right? But up to this point, we didn't have a name for them. In some ways, if we're working in a billable setting, we have to call it something else, find a different name for it, call it anxiety or depression or OCD or whatever it might be, even though this is actually more accurate and actually speaks to what we're working with and what is the underlying dynamics, rather than just the fact that somebody's anxious or the fact that somebody's depressed. So with that, for me, this was a really striking aspect of my NARM learning, was distinguishing between elements of PTSD, which we'd see more as a singular life-threatening experience, a moment that starts and stops. There's also secondary and vicarious traumatization, which in some ways are just PTSD also, that do have a little different etiology, but generally speaking, with PTSD, we have a sense of threat, hypervigilance, avoidance, and re-experiencing is the three primary components of what we'd look at in PTSD. And in complex PTSD, those things are all true. It's not to say that they're, these are completely different experiences, but it also includes affect dysregulation, negative self-concept, and interpersonal disturbances. So all of a sudden, we also incorporate that our sense of ourselves is different. Our relationship to ourselves and other people is different. Like you can have I know and have worked with clients, many of y'all probably have, that might have gotten into a car accident. We might have hypervigilance. We might not want to drive a car. We might have flashbacks or nightmares or these kinds of things. Those can all be true. But having a car accident in adulthood that would qualify for a PTSD diagnosis doesn't also mean I'm a terrible person because I'm, because I had a car accident. I'm unworthy because I had a car accident, which is often how we also, the negative self-concept, the interpersonal disturbance is also what shows up when we start introducing this complex PTSD diagnosis. So how do we work with it? We're going to go into it a little bit of, frameworks and kind of underlying principles of the NARM model here in a moment. I know we've been doing a lot of lead up to this thing. But this, this understanding is, for me, was really significant in understanding not just why a treatment for a PTSD experience might need to be different from a complex PTSD presentation. And, for a lot of us, this work is complex, right? As soon as we start introducing all of these different dynamics beyond just, an attachment relationship, there's a lot to account for, a lot of impacts, ways in which, a school experience or, violence in the neighborhood, these kinds of things all impact our sense of safety and our sense of, healthy development in our lives. And we've all been in situations with clients where we sort of feel like we're drinking from a fire hose, where there's so much information to try and get through and understand and organize that it's really hard to track. And what I have found really valuable about NARM, what we'll talk about in a sec, is that there's a way in which we can create organization out of complexity, out of chaos in a lot of ways. That, as much as all of these experiences are valid, that the presentation and what is showing up for the client in the room with me in the moment is what I'm working with. And so in some ways there's complexity, and there's also, an element of simplicity, and we're sort of holding both of those things to be true, not getting so caught up in the content and the story, or, having to play like whack-a-mole of trying to, fix the school problem, fix the relationship problem, fix the, the problems at work, but instead looking at the client as sort of the common denominator among all of these things, and seeking to create an environment where if they shift the relationship with themselves and how they're interpreting the world around them, then all of these things in their lives, all of these domains start to improve, or change at the very least. That's the hope. So with that, Ellen, do you want to go into survival styles? You're muted.
Thanks. Alex has been talking about how we have these significant adverse or traumatic experiences in our earlier life. And they're also, as he's saying, it can be very confusing, because the symptoms and complaints that people come to us with may be almost unending, or they may actually turn into what we're taught is resistance in the treatment room, or people start to get better and then they disappear. And so what NARM really seeks to do is sort of step back and take a look at the reason for why certain adaptations show up. And we call these survival styles. So let's take a look at the next slide. So there's a lot of information packed in here, and I'm going to invite you to just kind of sit back and let it kind of come to you rather than sort of struggle for it. But in NARM, rather than use character styles, and we have some character types listed on the left column there. What Dr. Heller chose to do was actually to look at what's considered a development theme, and styles. The development themes are named for core needs at that certain time of our life, and also for a missing or compromised core capacity. So let's take a look at that with just one particular survival style. So when we first arrive in the world, what we are, our task when we arrive and set our little feet on the earth is our task is to learn to connect to others and to ourselves. And what we actually need to be able to do that is connection. And so what Larry has done is he's named that particular development stage, and that's named for what we need and what we're going to develop. And then also as a survival style, if we aren't provided with the adequate support, we might develop adaptations around that. And the concept of NARM is that what happened in the past is significant, but it's really the persistence of these survival styles that distort the present experience and create our symptoms. And the survival styles evolve to actually preserve our attachment relationship. Because if you look at the child's experience, loss of caregivers, attachment, a welcoming environment means loneliness, banishment, or possibly even death. So the primary task of the child is to protect that attachment relationship. And because the child can't sit back and say, so-and-so's having a bad day, my nanny is late, my teacher didn't have gas in her car this morning, they will blame themselves. And these survival styles sort of build up around that self-blaming. It's a coping mechanism for dealing with these failures of the environment. And the other thing is to recognize that in the NARM lens is that the patterns actually create disconnection with the self, maintaining outer attachment and safety by disconnecting with the self. And it's very interesting because you think of that early slide that Alex showed, Gabor Mate said, trauma is disconnection. So disconnection, connection are very primary themes that we track in NARM. So to the degree that our needs are met in these 5 stages of development that you see before you, we're going to experience ourselves as authentic and progressively develop a capacity for human connection. And to the degree that needs are not met or there's environmental failure, we'll develop survival style. And that will create dysregulation, distortion of identity that Alex was talking about in CPTSD. And that drives the ongoing symptoms that people come to therapy with. So let's talk a little bit once more about the developmental stages. In connection, what we're building is the capacity to be in touch with ourselves and our bodies. And then without that, in the case of environmental failure, self and others become the source of pain and not connection. So part of an adaptive style or strategy within those early years that might persist in later life would be to dissociate or mentalize. And we see these strategies that evolve from the survival styles as strengths that the child finds. And the other thing is in NARM, we don't try to take these away from a client. If someone comes up to us and says, well, I want to have a relationship, we understand that as they may truly want that, but they may have something in their way, but it's not something that can just be taken away from them. It's part of the awareness and the therapeutic process that actually becomes sort of deconstructed and dissolves. So for the attunement, the sort of next level of child development is a growing ability to attune to their own needs and emotions and to recognize, reach out, and actually take in nourishment. And in the case of environmental support, needs may be denied or considered to be too great to be met. And then adaptive strategies or strengths that the child may develop to cope with this is dependency or gratification of others at the expense of their own self. In the trust developmental stage, they're building the capacity for healthy dependence and interdependence. And then the injury that comes from environmental failure is the takeaway that they can't rely on others. And then they may build a compensating strength for maintaining a false self and controlling the environment as much as they can. With autonomy, the child is building a capacity to say yes, no, and to set limits, and to also speak their own mind and value their own opinions. And then a failure of environmental support might be seen as a violation of that child's inner world and their inner self. And they may compensate for this trauma by becoming subservient, getting along, becoming passive aggressive. And once again, we see these as strengths because this is what maintains connection for the child in an environment that's not supporting their authentic self. And then in the final stage, which Larry has called love and sexuality, the child begins to develop a capacity to integrate loving relationships with their own expression of what a vital sexuality may look like, and to live with an open heart. And with disruption to that, the child will learn to split and to compartmentalize these different aspects of self. So what I want to add is that in NARM, we don't consider these to be diagnoses. Survival styles are people and not diagnoses. And we also recognize as practitioners or therapists that we all have our own styles and adaptations and strategies. And this is something that's always in flux. And part of the training is to actually build awareness and relationship to our own strategies, and to rebuild more healthy ways of connecting. So can we see the next slide? So Besser van der Kolk, who was an early pioneer in actually establishing the PTSD diagnosis for us, he called these frozen structures. And he said the ability to identify and release the frozen structures are a major key to unlocking suffering and our potential for healing and growth. And Alex, you can take it from there, I think. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go on with some reflective exercises. So just taking a moment, and if you've been looking at the screen, you might just want to take a look around the room, kind of break that entrainment we all have to the written word in this little box we begin to shrink into. And we invite you to reflect on a time in your life that you experience connection with your body, with your emotions, or another person in close relationship. And once again, if it works for you, to go ahead and track your own internal experience. That might be sensation, emotions, images, memories. And if you feel moved to do so, feel comfortable just dropping a word or two into the chat, what you might notice overall. What is it like to Remember a moment of connection. Ah, warm. My whole body relaxed. Yeah, another warm and calm. Yeah, very relaxed, soothing. So we include these reflective exercises in NARM so that as practitioners, we can become more aware of this power, this psychobiological self we have in terms of the triggering of memory brings about physiological states. And you all are reporting calm, warmth, relaxation. We may have a client who becomes very dysregulated or uncomfortable actually as connection approaches, or they become connected to themselves. And doing these reflective exercises allows us to become aware of these tendencies in ourselves, and also more understanding and able to sit in calmness and acceptance with our clients when they report what their internal experience may be, and also their connection or disconnection. So let's try another one. And these exercises are sort of grouped according to the survival styles. So Alex, the next one. And so this time, you just kind of give yourself a shake or look around, kind of clear things out. We invite you to reflect on a time that you expressed your needs and someone responded positively. This could have been a really significant event or just something very small, where you expressed yourself out into the environment and someone responded back. And just once again, tracking your internal experience here and now. Mm. And we have somebody reporting delight, accepted, listened to, validated. Yeah, that comes up for me a lot. Validation. Someone felt important. Yeah. Relief. Mm-hmm. Valued. Yeah, so this is this power, the power of this early developmental cycle, really, where we learn to reach out and communicate something to the environment, and we're met. Somebody actually is attuned enough to know what we need or approximate it and come back to us in a meaningful way. Yeah, I'm important again, validated, valued. Mm-hmm. And if you think about how in just these simple memories, the power that comes up in terms of our own internal experience and how we relate to that response and how we relate to ourselves based on that. Believed, hope. Yeah, very powerful experiences for just a moment of reflection. So Alex, let's go to the last one. We aren't going to do all these because if you just flip through them, you begin to kind of lose some of the power of it. but you're welcome to try these and repeat these with yourself too, as you think about the strengths and the developmental stages. So this time, if you're participating, we invite you to reflect on a time that you reached out with love and it was received and reciprocated. I'll give you a moment to just experience, connect inwards. Peaceful. And thanks so much, everyone who's dropping in here, accepted. Yeah, it's really nice to get the feedback and also to put that back out to you as a group, so you know what your fellow participants are experiencing too. Thanks for participating in that. Hopeful, relieved, fulfilled. And interesting, just within your own small group here tonight, that you have such individual responses to these reflections. And as Alex was saying earlier, there's no wrong way to do this. You know, this is information gathering. This is touching in and finding who we are. Oh, we've got another one here. Happy. Thank you. Yeah. And identify with several of these. Grounded, connected. Yeah. And interesting how the language also comes back to the physical experience. It's grounded to feel received. Grounding, yeah. Which goes back to that very first experience of feeling connected. Yeah. Grounded. Okay, so I've given you a little bit of perspective on why we're using these reflective exercises and how they might sort of begin to work into the clinical practice. And what Alex is going to do now is actually talk about the model, because I'm pretty sure that's what you came for tonight.
Yeah, and what's cool is that I think in its own way, without talking about it specifically, conceptually, we've been talking about it in more of an experiential way. And that, you know, I think what is really amazing about these kinds of experiential activities and just what people are sharing is how, even if the experience itself is over, right, whatever we're reflecting on, whatever time we had where we did, you know, assert a boundary or a need and it was respected, for example, that it can still, you know, conjure these pleasurable experiences for us. It can still bring that out in the moment. And that's, you know, similarly true with you know, things that are more painful or vulnerable or hard. So, you know, what I love about this and how it demonstrates the model is that we, as much as we are curious about the past, that we also, within a NARM model, we don't go on archaeological digs to like find the trauma. We just sort of operate under the assumption that it's there, and it might talk about it and might come out, but that there's also what we really draw on is what's going on in the present moment experience when I'm sitting in therapy with somebody, how they are showing up with me and within the environment of the situation in relation to these significant experiences, whether they are, you know, more pleasurable or happy or fulfilling, or might be more painful as well. So with that, we see the goal of the broadly speaking, the goal of the process is to create a therapeutic environment in which it feels safe, or at least safer, than it might be out in the day-to-day world for somebody to, as Ellen said, find themselves, find the pieces of themselves that they had to disconnect from for very good reason, but are now struggling with, right? That's ultimately what I see as brings us into therapy. Indeed, we say that, the past is dead as much as the past is never dead. It's not even the past. That, as much as the event itself, the trauma, the experiences oftentimes are over. Like, we're not children growing up in these unfulfilling and unsupportive environments anymore. Like, I work primarily with adults, but the impacts of those are what shows up for us, and ultimately what causes problems for folks in the way that they're wanting to address when they come into therapy. So with that, we start to wonder, what are the patterns that are preventing me from being present to myself and others in this moment and in my life? That's a question that we explore in different ways with clients in the moment in a session. It's something I, reflect on. Maybe after y'all are done tonight, you can start to do a little journaling around that yourselves if you so desire. Because ultimately that's the tension that we see. There's our authentic self that exists always in us. It doesn't go away no matter how distant or far away it feels, but that there are patterns, there are circumstances, there are situations, there are strategies that get in the way of us showing up in the way that we want to. And so with that, we do see NARM is designed as both a bottom-up and a top-down approach. So bottom-up being, somatic. So we're looking at the physiological experience. This is sort of the two sides of psychobiological, right? There's the physical experience, our nervous system regulation and all the different processes that we experience on a physical standpoint, and psychodynamic, so top down. So we are also looking at the thoughts and the emotions, because as we said, when we held up those two comparisons between PTSD and CPTSD, affect dysregulation, interpersonal disturbances, those kinds of things are impacted by our thoughts and our emotions as well. So it's, we go beyond just the body and look to incorporate all these other elements while also looking at interpersonal neurobiology. So folks, Dan Siegel, Alan Shore, Stephen Porges, within a context of a mindfulness-based practice in the moment in therapy. So I'm always asking people, like, what are you noticing right now in this moment as you talk about that fight with your partner or that, disappointing situation? That's the sort of the tapestry of the different elements that we're incorporating here in the clinical model. And so with that, our hope is to support post-traumatic growth. So to not and within that, we see building a psychobiological capacity to stay connected to ourselves. That if we understand trauma as the impacts of trauma to support disconnection or to encourage disconnection, that in our work together, I see our process as building a psychobiological capacity to stay with ourselves, even when situations are a struggle, or stressful or overwhelming, even when we might have to state a boundary to a partner, and that might counteract every single strategy we've ever learned, every message we've ever received not to do that. That instead of withdrawing, rolling over and saying, no, it's not actually that important, to stay with ourselves, that capacity to stay with ourselves, because it's something that's important to us, even if for a lot of years we learned not to do that. So NARM is not sequential exactly. There is a sequence to it, but it is more oriented around, it's not manualized, I would say is a better word. So it's oriented around 4 founding principles. The first of which, pillar 1, we call clarifying the therapeutic contract. So this involves, and my clients will tell you what they hear is you sit down every single session and say, what is it that you'd want for yourself from our time together today? And that is less about I want to have this skill, or I want to, be smarter, better looking, and, have a full-on exercise routine, but more to say, like, how is it that you want to be feeling differently? Like, what is the intention or the hope that you have, even if it doesn't feel realistic, even if it doesn't feel, even if we don't know how to get there. How are you hoping to feel differently, so that the client and I have a shared intention for the work that we're doing? A lot of times, therapist in a position of power, has this idea like, oh, this is, I kind of have a sense of what's better for the client. A lot of models, sort of structured around that way. Or I have a sense of, how to get where we're needing to go. And I see instead with this, therapeutic contract as sort of our north, that we are co-explorers trying to figure it out together. And, the other piece is gaining consent here, that a lot of trauma has been underlined by a lack of consent in the actions that people were involved in, or the things that were done to them. And so within a therapeutic setting, we really want to avoid replicating that experience of feeling like I'm the one guiding this process, or that I know what's better for them than they do, because I don't. So once we have our therapeutic contract, we move to pillar 2, that involves asking exploratory questions. And these are more inquiry and process oriented rather than content oriented. So, it's at times I'll clarify information, but more what I'm looking for is to see how the client is relating to their internal world, how their internal world relates to the world around them. So, trying to understand, what it means to you that you didn't get the promotion at work. Like, what are you telling yourself about that? And using that as a way to understand more broadly, like the themes and ideas and the way in which somebody is relating to themselves, more broadly in the world. So it's less about, finding out specific information, but more understanding, gaining a better sense of how they are viewing themselves. From there, and again, I guess not from there necessarily, but another element of this is that we're always doing what we seek to do is reinforcing agency. So reflecting in a compassionate way, the way in which somebody's relating to their internal and external world, such that we can understand how the things that they are doing to themselves, right? Like getting a job, not getting a job is a bummer and could be frustrating, sure. And the fact that we are shaming ourselves around that, the fact that we are criticizing and judging and rejecting ourselves because of this external event that may have had nothing to do with us at all, is where we tend to lose the sense of agency. And so instead we look to that through the NARM model to see, okay, what are you doing to yourself with this? How are you talking to yourself about this? How are you responding to yourself in this moment or in this situation, such that we can shift what feels like, oh, I just feel ashamed, to, oh, I shame myself. And if I start to understand, oh, I shame myself, I can also decide, maybe someday I won't do that. Like I can decide whether I choose to or not, rather than it just being something that happens to us. And finally, we reflect psychobiological shifts. So all in the moment, we're also curious, like, what is, how does this feel for you? As we start to notice this shift toward a greater sense of connection, how does it feel for you? What's going on for you internally? As you say those words, to that you feel strong or empowered or excited or connected to yourself. What do you notice there? Because again, we know that trauma is holistic in this way. It affects us on all levels. And if we can reinforce the psychobiological shifts, then we're tending to all the different elements of how people are impacted by traumatic experiences.
So we hope that we have whet your appetite to some degree for learning more about NARM. whether it's just certain aspects of this that you feel would be powerful to your current practice or sharing with colleagues, or maybe even doing some trainings yourself. So I'm going to give you some fairly quick information about different ways you can delve into the resources, and we hope the community. So let's take a look at that first slide. So when Dr. Heller first developed NARM, he was teaching it in Europe. He had moved from being a senior faculty member in the somatic experiencing world and began teaching what is now known as NARM. And it was a singular training. It was only offered in Europe. And then in the early 2010s, it was brought over to the US. And at that time, it was not restricted as to what your qualifications were other than you were in the healing profession. So I am somewhat of an anomaly in that I am not currently licensed as a clinical therapist, but the way NARM was organized before 2018, people in the healing professions were allowed to go through the entire curriculum of NARM. And the other thing is that based on the response to NARM and this real interaction with people who have completed the early trainings, and this real desire to develop it and use this as an effective clinical model, the curriculum has been built to have more of a focus on a clinical training. So what's happened is we have a level 1 OBT, online basics, and that is open to anyone who's actually in mental health, working in a healing profession. And the outcome of that is to become a NARM informed professional. We also have level 2, which is our basic clinical training. Then if you complete this, you'll become a NARM therapist. And many people find that that's just their sweet spot. Other people like Alex and myself say, I want more of this, and go on to master training. And we actually have a post-master training level now, which is developing for specialized training in different aspects, let's say personality disorders or such. So Alex, if you go on to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a little bit of idea of the logistics of how this works. As I said, level 1, let's take a look at that. That's a online training only. It's 4 online modules of 3 days, and it results in 60 CEU hours. You will have group case consults along the way. And as I said, it's for all professionals working with complex trauma. And then level 2 is the therapist training. And if you are currently clinically licensed, an intern, a student working towards licensure under supervision, you can apply to this level. You can actually skip the OBT and go directly to level 2. This is 4 live modules, and included in your certification, you will have experiential consults individually, as well as case consults. There are active coaching groups, and there are also study practice groups. And this results in 120 CEU hours. And with this, you can go on to level 3, a master's training. And then from there to level 4. So if you have any questions about that, you go to narmtraining.com, and there's lots and lots of information there. So I'm going to kind of leave that bit of information for your own investigation if you want to take a look at the training. I will add that there's an OBT training starting next week online that you could join. And there's also a level T2 hybrid group starting in the San Francisco Bay Area in February or March, and an online level 2 starting very soon in spring of 2023. So let's go now. So this is a quote from one of the people who completed one of the early US trainings in California, one of my classmates, actually. I'll just let you take that in. And I think what Susie really captures here is that for many of us, NARM was a missing piece in many good trainings that we had invested in, and many amazing people that we trained under. In that it brings a sense of real joy and completion to be able to sit with people. And in fact, the work of being a practitioner is lightened. And a lot of people actually report just enjoying their work a lot more. So we can go on. So one of the things, if you want to dip your toes into NARM, you can try the online inner circle. And what that really is it's a global online resource. And it includes monthly topic webinars with Dr. Heller and NARM faculty. It includes monthly demonstration videos. And actually these videos are deconstructed in later meetings. And it offers annotated transcripts of those demonstrations. And I will say also, for those of you who have learned through demonstrations, they've made a particular effort to get people other than students to come in. And they have actually had people from the general public who have come in for a series of NARM sessions, and you can actually track the movement between the sessions, which is very helpful. All of these recordings become part of an archive that's available to you. There's ebooks that you can download. There's a Facebook forum, which people really enjoy. It's a great place to exchange information and funny memes and poems and share frustrations or breakthroughs. And there's extra bonus materials. I will also say that if you enroll in any of the trainings, OBT through the Postmasters, that you receive a discount on that year's membership to the Inner Circle. And then finally, something that doesn't cost you anything at all, but is a great source of information and enjoyment, is our podcast. There's over 90 episodes now recorded. It's very easily found. And it includes interviews with NARM practitioners, NARM therapists, faculty members, and many other people in the trauma therapy field. So you might even start with the December one, where they go over the highlights of the 2022 podcasts. And the January 2023 podcast is an interview with Dr. Heller about heartfulness and NARM. So I highly recommend that you give those a try. So this is the end of our presentation, and Alex and I would really like to now be quiet and let you ask some questions, give us any feedback, your thoughts here. And once again, I really want to thank Laura for her presence here tonight, and for the Utah chapter for making this possible for us.
I'm also going to put our email addresses into the chat box. So
yeah, thank you.
If you do want to reach out, obviously this is something we care a lot about and we're really excited about. So if you do want to learn more or connect, feel free to reach out.
And I think there's a typo in yours. It says Allie at Alex White.
Yep,
Counseling.
sure it is. Thanks. And folks are welcome to, if you don't want to, jump on screen and talk, you're welcome to type a question in the chat box if you like. Otherwise, wrap up. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's been our pleasure.
Yeah, well, there aren't any questions that come up in the moment. Oh, and there was a question. or a question was posed initially about the slides that unfortunately we're not able to distribute them because they are the property of the NARM Training Institute. But again, happy to chat more and hear any questions or things that come up. So feel free to reach out to us if there is information that you felt like you missed or wanted to hear more about.
And Virginia, if it's okay, you have a message in here, but I'm not sure I'm getting the full context. You'd like to receive something. Was that receiving the slides tonight that Alex was just talking about? Virginia, are you okay being unmuted and just speaking to us directly? So yeah, Alex was explaining, unfortunately, we can't share the slides. The podcasts are an amazing way to get information. And then if you go to narmtraining.com, there is a directory of NARM practitioners, and it will link to their website as well as people who are working online, their background, very immense variation and spectrum of backgrounds going into NARM. So I'd recommend that you take a look at that. And being a NARM client is a wonderful way to experience the model and make decisions about whether you want to go further with it. Yeah, we really recommend that. Just let me know if that answered your question, Virginia.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Anything else you need from us, Laura, or anything to wrap up? Nope.
Can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I was asking if there was any sort of directory for if people were interested in finding a therapist who was NARM trained or certified.
Yeah, so there is on the NARM Training Institute website, there's a practitioner directory.
Okay.
You're also welcome to reach out to us, and it's a relatively small number of folks here in Utah, but we're slowly trying to grow. But also there are some folks who work in more of a coaching capacity and could potentially work with you outside of state lines. So don't hesitate to that's a good place to start, and also happy to talk more.
Okay, this is Virginia. I'm finally unmuted. I have the worst phone. Sorry.
Oh, you're doing this on your phone too. Well played.
Yes, because I don't have Wi-Fi, and I tried all the ways to hotspot, but
no worries.
So Utah is part of a pact with licensed professional counselors. So LPCs are now in packs, and you can have a license in Alabama, where I am, and you can practice in these 10 other states. And so maybe there are not many LPCs, none that I know of in Alabama, or I would probably see something on LinkedIn about it, but I don't care for the trauma-informed CEUs here. And I have a background in yoga teaching and then did my own psychoanalytic therapy. And I don't find any that I get trained in really worth my experience, I guess, because it does need to be a blend. It is a lot of body work, or at least grounding in your body. And then yet it's also, other kinds of therapy. So I appreciate learning about it tonight. And I'm going to look at the directory and you know, the cost. And I'm not currently in LPC. I let it slide in 2020 at the beginning of COVID. And so I'm working on CEUs, but I doubt that NARM, unless there's an LPC who's can do CEUs, like you all are not National Board of Certified Counselors. So if I got a CEU tonight, currently Alabama won't let me use the CEU. They used to, but our board got busy and restrictive. So we used to could send it in advance and say, will you approve it? But our board got too much like they know everything. So
Sounds
I
about
can't,
right.
yeah, well, yeah, I can't use my CEU as far as I know. I'll still get it, but maybe, I don't know. But I am going out west sometime soon, probably New Mexico. And I also can move if I want to, or relocate temporarily. I don't want to unground myself by moving permanently from that kind of thing. So I'm just very glad, and I finally figured out how to unmute myself on an older phone. It's crazy.
Well, we're glad too. So hold on to those CEUs that might at some point be useful to you. And Virginia, if you want to go to the NARM site, there is a practitioner directory there. And the other thing is that this level 1 online basics training is designed for people just like you who aren't currently licensed. And what it is a much deeper review of NARM theory and practice without the clinical emphasis. And we have yoga teachers and acupuncturists and EMTs and rabbis and meditation teachers. And it's a very massage therapist. It's a very diverse group, and they're very appreciative of learning NARM and taking it back to their particular scope of practice.
Wonderful. That's great. We need that. People need that. And the practitioners need, it helps them know more of what they're effecting if they're doing body work, what they're actually kind of bringing forth, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting. That was really interesting. And I know for me as a student, I'm definitely looking for like more modalities to be more educated in. So NARM is definitely something that sparked my interest. So yeah.
Well, thank you for having us. Thanks for being here on a Friday night, all of you.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
One last reminder, if you do need a CEU, please email me at ticnutah@gmail.com. I've put it in the chat. Yeah, and was there another question? I don't know if I heard anyone else. Okay, well, we'll wrap up, and thank you, Ellen and Alex. Oh.
What was your email again?
It's in the chat. It's ticnutah@gmail.com.
Oh, I think you emailed me. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
I hope everyone has a really lovely Friday evening, and we'll probably have another TICN presentation later in February, but stay tuned for the topic. I think I'll be getting that out in the next week or two. So, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. It's great.